Tonight, a security clamp has come down upon air travel as investigators here in London say they have busted up a plot to blow up commercial airliners.
This is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, reporting tonight from London.
And good evening from Heathrow Airport in London. Tonight, the way we travel by air has been altered, perhaps forever, because of what investigators here are calling a busted-up plot to blow commercial airliners out of the sky. As one public official put it here earlier today, we are entering a long, wide, and deep struggle against very evil people. The story started right here, and tonight it's being felt from coast to coast in the U.S. and beyond. Here is the very latest. The plot apparently involved 9 commercial jetliners bound for the U.S. from 4 major air carriers. Tonight, a total of 24 arrests have been made. British authorities today called this a plot to commit, quote, mass murder on an unimaginable scale. Tonight, the threat level for commercial flights leaving the UK for the U.S. is at red. That's the highest level. All other flights to the U.S. from overseas and all U.S. domestic flights are at orange, the second highest threat level. It was, as you can imagine, mass chaos today at airports around the globe. Our correspondents are covering this story and its ripple effects on both sides of the Atlantic tonight. We begin our coverage here with us in London with NBC News correspondent Keith Miller. He is standing by at Scotland Yard tonight. Keith, good evening.
Brian, police officials here are saying that they believe they have picked up most of the masterminds behind this attack. Meanwhile, they're also saying that they're certain it was an attempted attack on all the airliners going across the Atlantic. It is the most serious incident in British civil aviation since the Second World War. Heathrow, one of the world's busiest airports, temporarily shut down. 100,000 passengers stranded because of a security alert. A lengthy investigation uncovered a terror plot to target 9 planes bound for the United States. 3 groups of 3 planes each, attacked in successive waves.
We cannot stress too highly the severity that this plot represented. Put simply, this was intended to be mass murder on an unimaginable scale.
Overnight, police arrested 24 suspects in London, its suburbs, and Birmingham, uncovering chemicals.
Police cars showed up about midnight, vans, and 4 officers put the door in.
The men in custody are identified by police as British residents, aged between 17 and 35. All are reportedly Muslim, some of Pakistani descent.
We have been looking at meetings, movements, travel, spending, and the aspirations of a large group of people.
The Pakistani government said it helped Britain in the investigation and has arrested several suspects. But British authorities say the alleged mastermind of the plot is still at large in Pakistan. The plan of the attack, according to security officials, was to smuggle liquid explosives and detonators aboard the planes and then assemble them into small bombs. British Airways, United, American Airlines, and Continental were all potential targets, according to police. Overnight, the threat level in the UK was raised to its highest level, critical, when British intelligence considered the threat imminent. Hundreds of flights were cancelled, and many European flights were diverted.
We will get there. We're being British and stoic. We'll get there.
But air travel may never be the same. All of the men now being held are under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Basically, that allows the police to continue their investigation. They won't have to charge the suspects for at least a month. Brian.
Thanks, Keith. Keith Miller across town from us tonight at Scotland Yard. And now to the question of this day. How real was this? How close did we all come? NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams has been tracking this story all day in Washington at the Department of Homeland Security. Pete, good evening.
And I think the answer, Brian, tonight is quite close. U.S. authorities say the plotters were just a few days away from a test flight. They even had their tickets to see if they could get their chemicals through security and onto a plane. If the answer was yes, they were prepared to actually stage the attacks. U.S. officials say this was a carefully thought out and well-financed operation with all the earmarks of al-Qaeda. The apparent plan, two-man teams would bring chemicals through security that are harmless on their own, then assemble them on board, forming powerful explosives for suicide attacks.
The terrorists plan to carry the components of the bombs, including liquid explosive ingredients and detonating devices, disguised as beverages, electronic devices, or other common objects.
Among the components, common household liquids easily available at drug and hardware stores, which could be carried in drink containers. While an intelligence bulletin says the explosives were to be peroxide-based, NBC News is not disclosing the specific chemicals or possible detonators. Investigators say the plotters had not decided on specific flights to attack, but within the past few days were clicking around the internet looking at non-stop flights from the UK to the US that left around the same time.
They had focused on a number of airlines involved which have specific routes between Britain and the United States and which are US flag carriers.
U.S. officials say British investigators had the terror cell under close surveillance for several months, keeping the U.S. informed, then adding more specifics just within the past several days when the plotters focused on planes headed here. For the past several days, the FBI has feverishly looked for any potential ties to people in the U.S., but has so far found none.
We literally in the last couple of weeks have had hundreds of FBI agents around the country tracking down every lead, and we have not found to date any plotters here in the United States.
Aviation experts say airport screening devices have a hard time picking up the chemicals that the plotters plan to use, something officials verified with an early morning test at Washington's National Airport. And as for the terror threat system, there is no idea tonight how long it will stay at its higher levels, Brian.
Pete, here at Heathrow, this is the sound they like to hear. A lot of the long-line jetliners are finally now taking off after a day-long backlog. The question tonight, was this to be the big one, the so-called spectacular attack that we've been worried someone was plotting?
Could well be tonight, they say, Brian, that this could have been as devastating as 9/11 itself. Authorities tonight say they believe the UK has either identified or arrested all the plotters there, but they're leaving the terror threat level up for two reasons. They can't be sure they have everybody, and secondly, they want to guard against potential copycat attacks, Brian.
All right, Pete Williams at the Department of Homeland Security in Washington after a long day there. Now to the anxiety and the hardship for travelers that rippled across the Atlantic to virtually every airport in the United States today. NBC's Tom Costello is at Reagan National Airport in Washington, where I know, Tom, it was a wild day there.
It was indeed, Brian. Good evening to you. And in fact, at airports nationwide, travelers got this flyer. Effective immediately, it says, no liquids, no gels on board. That includes beverages, shampoos, suntan lotion, creams, toothpaste, and hair gel. And with that new directive applying to all airports nationwide, the security backup exceeded 2 hours in some cities. From east to west, it's been a day of long lines and confusion as the nation yet again adjusted to a new travel reality.
Leave the liquids at home, drink them, declutter your bag.
No liquids or gels of any sort.
At Washington's Reagan National Airport, the security backups began early with the morning rush. While at Dulles, water, soda, deodorant, Visine, contact solution, anything liquid tossed out in mass.
There's no way to make through security in time today. I think we were going to come back about 3 hours early.
In Atlanta, the TSA checkpoint looked like the makeup counter at Nordstrom's. In Baltimore, the security backup stretched out the terminal doors and down the sidewalk. In Boston, the state police were in the airport as the governor ordered National Guard backup.
This is very, very annoying.
While in Miami,
5'9" with large backpack,
automatic weapons and dogs with the airport's own SWAT team ready to counter any potential attack.
We expect it's going to happen any single day. We deploy our people with a specific function every day to try to prevent any type of attacks here at Miami.
In Chicago, highway signs warn departing passengers what to leave behind. My NBC colleagues watched the day play out elsewhere in the country.
I'm Jennifer London at Los Angeles International Airport, where as part of the increased security measures, a stronger police presence, including bomb-sniffing dogs like Kobe. And yes, the lines here are massive, and a lot of the passengers know they may miss their plane, but they tell me they're okay with the increased security measures because they'd rather be safe than sorry.
I'm Ron Allen at New York's Kennedy Airport, where late this afternoon passengers began arriving from London. Tired, relieved, with many agreeing it was probably the safest flight they've ever been on in their lives.
The security by the British authorities was unbelievable.
As the day progressed, the delays seemed to ease.
Once our customers got the hang of it, once TSA's people got the hang of it, it began to smooth itself out.
That's what happened in Denver. 90-minute security delays in the morning, but by midday, back to the new normal.
As for the restrictions that we have in place now, there are a few exceptions. You can bring on baby formula, breast milk, or juice if you are traveling with a child and if you taste it in front of the security screener. As for how long these new procedures will be in place, indefinitely is the answer. Brian?
Well, meet the new normal. Tom Costello at Reagan National Airport for us tonight. Tom, thanks for that. And now to the President of the United States, who used some harsh new language to describe the alleged plotters of this operation today. NBC's David Gregory, our chief White House correspondent, with us from Washington tonight for that. David, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. It was late yesterday afternoon when the president got official word that these arrests were imminent. That word after days of intensive conversations between British and American authorities, including the president speaking to British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Aide said today it was a stressful time. Everybody, quote, on the edge of their seat, waiting for these arrests to go down. The president was in Wisconsin today, officials saying that last night he gave official approval to elevate that terror threat level to the highest level. And you see him here reacting to the arrest with strong language.
This nation is at war with Islamic fascists who will use any means to destroy those of us who love freedom, to hurt our nation.
An advisor said later the use of that term, Islamic fascist, was meant, very calculated by the president, to convey the idea, the argument that while violent extremism may take very many forms, it is part of one movement against the West. Brian?
David, thanks. David Gregory in Washington tonight. And with us tonight for more on all of this, the former head of counterterrorism for the NYPD, Michael Sheehan, who is these days an NBC News terrorism analyst. And Mike, as we listen to another jet take off behind us here, how close, in your judgment, did we come here? And were they looking at perhaps the September 11th anniversary?
Well, Brian, they had the people, they had a well-developed plot, and it appears they were putting together the materials to make a bomb and were about to run a practice run. So I would say they're probably within weeks of executing an attack, but fortunately, as we know, the British had penetrated that cell and were able to unravel it.
And Mike, also in your judgment, did any good come out of all of this?
Well, certainly there was good. Since 9/11 in the United States and since the London subway attacks last year, intelligence and law enforcement officials are on their toes for these types of plots. Any sophisticated plot like this one, or 9/11, that takes 15, 20 or more people, opens itself up to their vulnerability for penetration by law enforcement intelligence. And that's exactly what happened here. Perhaps by physical surveillance, electronic surveillance on their phones or computers, New Scotland Yard was able to identify these people and put their arms around them before they were able to conduct an attack.
And a lot of people are now saying science has to catch up and help catch some of these liquid agents when they get to the airport. Mike Sheehan, thank you for joining us from our New York studios tonight. We'll take a break when NBC Nightly News continues from London this Thursday evening. We'll have an in-depth look at the likelihood of an al-Qaeda connection to this airline plot. And later, it may change flying forever. What today says about life today.
39.
Terror in the sky. NBC News with ongoing coverage. Behind the plot. The effect on America. On Today, NBC Nightly News, MSNBC, CNBC, MSNBC.com, and NBC Mobile. Target America. Terror in the sky. NBC News, America's news leader.
Sunday, new terror plot. 5 years after 9/11. How safe are we? Exclusive interview with 9/11 Commission chairs Tom Keene and Lee Hamilton. Only on Meet the Press.
We are back now from our post here tonight at Heathrow Airport in London with NBC News in depth tonight. As we heard Pete Williams report earlier in the broadcast, the FBI says the plot that got broken up today had all the earmarks of al-Qaeda. the terrorist network that has, of course, been linked to 9/11 and so many other attacks, like the London bombings just last summer, 52 killed. The Madrid train bombings in 2004, 191 people killed. And the deadly bombings in Bali, 202 people dead. NBC News senior investigative correspondent Lisa Myers reports tonight on why some are drawing such an immediate al-Qaeda conclusion.
First, there is the Pakistani connection. Counter-terror sources tell NBC News that some of those arrested in London recently traveled to Pakistan, and while there are believed to have trained in explosives. These sources also say money was wired from Pakistan to London, presumably to purchase plane tickets. 2 men also were arrested recently in Pakistan in connection with the plot.
Whenever there's a Pakistani component to these type of operations, that normally means there's an al-Qaeda element as well.
Next, a martyrdom video. NBC News has learned that at least one of the London plotters made a martyrdom video to be aired after the suicide attacks, an al-Qaeda trademark. And then there is the plot itself, strikingly similar to one foiled in the Philippines 11 years ago. That plot, called Operation Bojinka, was to bomb 12 U.S. airliners as they crossed the Pacific Ocean using liquid explosives. Today's plot repeats both targets and methods.
It is certainly true that al-Qaeda studies past terrorist plots that have failed and attempts to recreate them in a more successful environment.
When the first attack on the World Trade Center failed, al-Qaeda attacked again on 9/11. Also, there are al-Qaeda's messages. Both Osama bin Laden and his number 2, Ayman al-Zawahiri, have promised something big as recently as last month.
This was at least a component, if not the entirety, of al-Qaeda's plans and proclaimed announcements of an upcoming spectacular attack.
While the extent of al-Qaeda's involvement is not yet clear, some experts do see fingerprints.
You'll find al-Qaeda support in the bomb making, in the training of individuals, in the movement of money, and perhaps even recruitment.
If this is indeed the work of al-Qaeda, many counter-terror experts see it as proof that al-Qaeda has been able to reconstitute itself despite heavy losses since 9/11. Lisa Myers, NBC News, Washington.
Another break. When we come back from London tonight, we will take a look at some of the rest of this day's news.
Today, a new guide to air travel. What you need to know before you fly. Target America, Terror in the Sky, on today only on NBC.
Target America, Terror in the Sky, NBC Nightly News tomorrow.
We are back once again tonight here in London with, as promised, some of the other news of this day, and that includes a suicide attack just outside a Shiite mosque in southern Iraq. The bomber blew himself up while being patted down by police. At least 35 people were killed. Scores more were injured. Shiite leaders blame Sunni loyalists of Saddam Hussein. NBC's Andrea Mitchell, our chief foreign affairs correspondent, has learned tonight that there is a tentative deal for a ceasefire in the Middle East in this month-long war between Israel and Hezbollah. U.S. officials, along with their French counterparts, say they are largely in agreement on a new UN resolution calling for an end to the violence and the introduction of an international force. The resolution calls for an Israeli withdrawal as the international force is then deployed. The Lebanese are being consulted, and Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice will travel to New York first thing tomorrow morning, we're told, and will push for a vote tomorrow. Back home, the Treasury Department released new numbers today showing an improved federal budget deficit. July's deficit totaled $33.2 billion, down from $53.4 billion last July. The White House projects the deficit for the year will be down from last year's rate, but still the fourth highest on record in the U.S. This big story here out of London today had a big impact on the oil markets. Traders bet that travelers will cut back on flying, so crude prices dropped more than $2 a barrel, reversing that trend. That helped buoy the stock market. The Dow finished up more than 48 points in New York today. NASDAQ was up 11.5 points on the day. Another break, and we're back in a moment with a look at how today has already changed all of us.
Why harmful UV rays and glare?
Dateline Friday. Powerless to control.
Target America, Terror in the Sky. Continuing coverage all evening on the network with the global reporting power of NBC News, MSNBC Primetime.
One last note here. After signing off the air last night, I boarded a commercial jetliner with my family for a flight across the Atlantic. We arrived in another country, and we arrived as well in a new era. In just the time it took to cross the ocean, times had changed. Flying with liquids is now no longer allowed because, however perverse a notion this is, someone has now figured out a new way to take down a commercial jetliner full of innocent people. After saving up their money for months, a lot of Americans got on jetliners today to head off on summer vacation with their children. Some were told it would mean going without milk or juice or water, even baby formula, or a way to entertain a 2-year-old. Some waited all day in the airport for the privilege of flying on commercial jetliners, even after learning they are still savory and sought-after flying targets of a sort. Here in London today, a World War II veteran seemed downright wistful when he told me, at least back in World War II, he knew who to shoot at based on the shape of their helmets. This new enemy wears no such thing. As our own Pete Williams said earlier today, we prefer it when the news is that nothing happened. But something did happen today, nonetheless, and to all of us. This is our generation's conflict, a war with flying targets and an often invisible enemy. And once again, we are linked with our allies an ocean apart, and another generation is called upon to meet a new challenge. On that note, that's our broadcast for this Thursday night. Thank you for being with us. I'm Brian Williams, reporting tonight from London. Good night.
NASCAR's